wood smoke, from a fire that has been lit and relit in the same place for 10 years. That is the first thing you would find if you came up that beach. A smell of burning before you saw anything, drifting down off the low cliff on the evening air, sharp and resinous. Because the only wood on this island is scrub and driftwood, and it burns fast and hot and gives off a lot of smoke. Under it, other smells. Old feathers, fish drying on a line of twisted grass, salt on everything, on the rocks and in the air and in the crust that dries on your arms if you sit near the water for an hour. And something else, closer to the cave, that nobody who came here ever forgot. The island is a real one. It sits in the northeastern Aegean, a volcanic place, roughly circular with 2 deep bays biting into it from opposite sides so that it nearly divides in half. There is very little fresh water. The rock is dark and porous and holds the heat of the day well into the night, and the wind comes across it from the north for most of the sailing season with nothing to break it. In the old days, they said there was a fire on it that had come out of the ground on its own, and that the smith god had landed there when he was thrown out of heaven, and that the smiths of that island were his. And on the shore of it, in a cave with 2 mouths, there is a man who has been alone for 10 years. Let yourself get comfortable. This is a quiet story. There is no battle in it, no monster, nothing that will make you sit up. It is about a man on a beach and 2 people who come to fetch him, and an argument about what you owe somebody you have wronged. I will tell you now that it ends well, because it does, and because there is no reason to make anybody carry that question through a story they are trying to fall asleep in. If these long nights help you rest, a like is what lets this quiet channel find other people awake at this hour. And I do like knowing where you are. Leave your town and the time on your clock in a comment before you drift off, and I will read it in the morning. Now, the cave. It has 2 mouths, and that matters, and he chose it for that reason. In winter, the wind comes from one quarter, and in summer from another, and with 2 openings, you can always find a corner out of it. In the hot months, he said, the double entrance lets a breeze through, and you can sleep. Come inside. It is not squalid. That is the first surprise. A man who has been alone for a decade has had a great deal of time, and everything here is arranged. There is a bed, which is a heap of leaves pressed flat into the shape of a body. The same leaves, gathered fresh, when the old ones crumble. There is a wooden cup, badly made, the poet says. Crude workmanship, cut by somebody who was learning as he went and had nothing to learn from. There is a flint and tinder kept dry in a fold of rock. There is a line of rags drying, and they are the worst thing in the cave, and we will come back to them. And there is water. Below the cave, downhill, there is a spring. The one thing on this island that made the whole arrangement survivable, and he tells the audience about it the way a man tells you about his well. That is his estate, a cave with 2 doors, a bed of leaves, a cup he carved, a fire and a spring. He has no ship. He has no companions. No one has landed here in 10 years except by accident, and the few who have, a passing crew blown off course, sheltering for a night, gave him food and pity and would not take him with them. He asked, every time. And every time they said they were afraid, or that the wind was wrong, or that their own voyage was urgent, and they left him standing on the sand. What he does have is a bow, and it is not an ordinary bow, and everything that happens tonight happens because of it. It belonged to the strongest man who ever lived, and he was given it for one act of decency at the very end. Here is how that went. The strong man was dying in agony of a poison he could not get off his skin, and he had himself carried up a mountain in the south of Thessaly and a pyre built on the summit, and he lay down on it and asked to be lit. And nobody would do it. His own son would not. His companions would not. They stood around a stack of timber on a mountaintop with a man on it begging them, and not one of them could pick up a torch. And a young man stepped forward and did it. Some traditions give that act to a different member of the party, and there was more than one version circulating in antiquity. In the one that lasted, it was him, and the dying man gave him, in exchange, the bow and the quiver of arrows he had carried through every one of his labors. The arrows were tipped with the blood of the water serpent he had killed as a young man, which is the same poison that was killing him, and which nothing survives. And there was a condition attached, and this is where it turns. He made the young man swear never to tell anyone where the pyre had been. He swore it, and afterwards, under pressure, from whom the sources differ, he told. Not in words, in one telling. He stamped his foot on the ground to indicate the place, which he seems to have believed was a technicality. It was not. That is one explanation for what happens to him next, and the ancient sources offer it and then offer 3 others, and none of them agrees with the rest. There is something worth saying about that bow before we go on, because it is not a prop. It never misses. That is the property attached to it in every source that mentions it. The arrows find what they are aimed at, and what they hit does not survive because of what is on the tips, which means the man on that island is, in strictly practical terms, the most dangerous individual alive. He can kill anything at range, including anything divine that comes close enough, and he is using it to shoot pigeons. That is the picture the play gives you, and it never quite stops being funny and awful at the same time. The most powerful weapon in the world, in the hands of a man who cannot walk, being used to knock birds off a rock face so he can eat. The Greeks were interested in the bow as an object with a history. Weapons were inherited, and the inheritance mattered. There is a helmet in the war poem whose provenance is traced back 4 owners over several generations, and a sword given as a guest gift that gets its own paragraph. This one has the best provenance available. It belonged to the strongest man who ever lived. It went through the 12 labors, and it was handed over on a burning pyre as payment for the one favor nobody else would do. Which raises a question the play is very quiet about. He could have used it on himself, at any point in 10 years. He says so obliquely, more than once, that he has wished for death, that he has called out for it, that nobody came, and he never does it, and the play does not make a speech about why. Some readers take that as simple stubbornness. Others hear something else in it, that the bow is the only thing left of the man who gave it to him, and that a person who has one relationship left in the world, even with a dead man, is not entirely alone. Now the voyage. He sailed for Troy with 7 ships from his own country in Thessaly, and he is in the great catalogue in the war poem, listed by name with his ships counted as the best archer among the Greeks. And on the way east, the fleet stopped at a small island to make a sacrifice. They needed to. There was an altar there, an old one, half forgotten, belonging to a local nymph or a local goddess. And the sources cannot agree which island it was on either. They put in to find it and to make the offering that would get them the rest of the way. And he found the altar. He knew where it was, in most versions, because he had been there years before with the strong man. And in the scrub beside it, coiled, was a snake. He is bitten on the foot. Some tellings make it the goddess's own guardian, punishing an intrusion. Some make it a punishment for the broken oath about the pyre. One tradition has him drop one of the poisoned arrows on his own foot instead, which is a neater kind of irony, and probably later. And one, quoted by an ancient commentator, says he simply stepped on a snake in long grass on a hot afternoon, which is the least mythological and by far the most likely thing that ever happened to a man in a Greek meadow. The species is worth 2 minutes, because the ancient sources are more specific than you would expect, and because it explains the rest of his life. The word used is one that covers several snakes, but the one that fits, and the one that lives in that part of the world, is a viper. Greece has them still. The nose-horned viper of the Balkans is the one with the reputation, a heavy-bodied snake, gray or brown, with a dark zigzag down the back, not aggressive, and mostly interested in not being stepped on. It lies up in dry, stony scrub, exactly like the ground around an old altar in a clearing. And what viper venom does is not what people imagine. It is not a nerve poison that stops your breathing. It is, essentially, a digestive agent. It breaks down tissue and it destroys the small blood vessels around the bite, and the flesh in that area dies. The medical name for what follows is necrosis, and the ancient descriptions of this wound are, without knowing any of the biology, a decent clinical account of it. Something that does not heal, that keeps producing discharge, that comes with waves of extreme pain, and that goes on because the tissue underneath keeps dying. Untreated in the 5th century before our era, on a beach, with no debridement and no antibiotics and no way of keeping it clean. A bite like that either kills you in a week or leaves you with a chronic ulcerated wound that never closes. That is the second option, and it is the one the story describes with unnerving precision. The smell is a real symptom too, and it is the one that ancient medical writers noted, and modern ones still do. There is a body of Greek medical writing from roughly the same period as the play, and its authors were careful observers of exactly this. What a wound smells like, what color the discharge is when it changes. They believed you could prognose from it. They were sometimes right. Whatever bit him, the wound would not close. That is the whole of the problem. Not the pain in itself, though the pain was extraordinary. The wound did not heal, and did not scab, and did not stop, and after a few weeks, it began to smell. There was discharge. The play that tells this story best is unsparing about it, and about what it does to the people around him. A sweet, thick, rotten smell that got into the camp, that nobody could sit near, that came and went with the flare-ups. And there were the cries, because it came in attacks, days sometimes of something bearable. And then it would take him, and he would scream, and the screaming went on, and it could not be stopped or quieted or predicted. And they were trying to make sacrifices. That is the practical crisis, and it is easy to miss if you are not thinking in that world's terms. A Greek sacrifice requires ritual silence at the key moment, a formal hush, called for out loud, in which the offering is made. Ill-omened sounds ruin it. A man howling on a beach 100 paces away does not merely disturb the ceremony, he invalidates it. An army of 100,000 men about to fight a 10-year war cannot make an offering to its gods. And there was a second reason, and the play is honest enough to let it be said. They were frightened of it. A wound that will not close, that produces a smell in a camp of 100,000 men living on a beach with no sanitation for 10 years. That is not only a religious problem. Ancient armies were destroyed by disease far more often than by fighting, and everybody knew it. The war poem itself opens with a plague in that exact camp, killing the animals first, and then the men for 9 days. They called it a god's arrows. We would call it something else. Either way, the men on that beach had watched a sickness go through a camp and take 1/10 of them, and they were not inclined to be philosophical about a man rotting in a tent. So there is a version of this decision that is neither cruelty nor piety but quarantine. The oldest and crudest form of it, practiced for the same reason it has always been practiced, by people who did not know what caused disease but knew perfectly well that it spread. Which does not make it better. It arguably makes it worse, because a decision taken out of fear can be taken by anybody. And the play's whole difficulty is that everybody who made it was, by the standards of their world, being sensible. So they took a decision. They waited until he was asleep. That is the detail that has done the damage for 3,000 years. Not a vote, not an announcement, not a man being told he is being left. He fell asleep on a beach. After an attack, exhausted, the way you sleep after real pain. And when he woke up, the ships were gone. They left him some food and a few rags, which in one sense is decency, and in another is the worst part of it, because it means they thought about it. In the play, he tells the story himself, and the way he tells it is the reason audiences have never got over it. He says, "I woke, and there was no one." And he describes standing on the shore and the shouting coming back off the rocks, and understanding. To Greek listeners, this meant something specific and serious. Abandoning a man to die was not merely cruel. A man who dies unburied on an empty island cannot be given rights, and the shade of a man without rights does not settle. The people who sailed away had not only left him, they had arranged his afterlife, and the man who gave the order, or at least the man he blames, and whom every source names, was the cleverest of the Greeks. The man from the small rocky island in the west, who we have spent several nights with, who has a talent for finding the practical solution to a problem when nobody else can bear to say it out loud. Now, 10 years. The play and the poems behind it do not narrate them. Nothing happens in them. So let me give you the shape of what a day was, because the texture of it is the most restful thing in this story, and it is where I would like you to drift off. He wakes early, because pain wakes you early. The first thing is the leg. There is a stiffness in it overnight that has to be worked out slowly before it will take weight, and the first few steps of the day are the worst few steps of the day, and after 20 minutes, it settles into the ordinary version of itself. Then water. The spring is downhill, and downhill on a bad leg is harder than up, and he does it with a stick, and does it slowly, and the trip takes a long time, and he does not mind, because there is nothing else to do with the time. Then food, and this is the whole of his economy. The bow. Birds mostly. The island is on a flyway, and there are pigeons in the rocks, and seabirds, and in the migration months there is a week or two of plenty when everything is passing through. He shoots what he can reach. He cannot chase anything, so he shoots what comes to him from cover sitting down. The poison in the arrows is a complication he does not discuss, and the play does not raise, and the practical answer is presumably that he cut around the wound, or that after this long he had ordinary arrows too. He drags the bird back. He plucks it. That is where the feathers come from. The drifts of them outside the cave, years of feathers blowing about in the scrub. Then fire. Fire is the hardest thing and the most important, and he explains in the play how he manages it, striking stone on stone until a spark takes in dry stuff, which he says he does not usually have to do because he keeps the embers going. Fire is not a thing you make. It is a thing you keep, and letting it out is a small disaster that costs a whole afternoon. Then the long middle of the day, and there is nothing in it. That is what 10 years actually is. Not incident. Sitting on a rock above a beach in the afternoon with the sun on the water, and nothing coming and nothing to do, and the leg aching in the background, and doing that 4,000 times. He watches the horizon. He would not be able to stop. And here is where the theme of tonight arrives, and I want to put it down plainly before we go on, because everything else in the story hangs off it. He is a man who cannot die and cannot live. The wound does not kill him. 10 years, and it has not managed it. It hurts him and disables him and empties his life out, and it does not finish the job. And he cannot get off the island, so he cannot have any of the things a life is made of either. That is the condition, and it is worse than either of the alternatives, and he says so. The Greeks had a very clear idea about what a good human life was, and it had an end on it. You were born, you did what you could, you were survived by children who remembered you, and somebody buried you properly and said the words. Death was not the enemy in that system. Being forgotten was. Dying badly was. Dying where nobody could bury you was. He is facing all three at once, and he knows it. And it is the thing that comes up again and again in his speeches. Not the pain, but the prospect of dying alone on that shore and being eaten by the birds he has been eating. That is what he means when he calls himself already dead. Not despair, exactly, an accurate description of his social position. He is a man the army held a funeral for, in effect, 10 years ago, and who then went on being alive on a rock in the North Aegean, watching the sea. And what the ending gives him, in the end, is not the removal of the suffering. It is the return of the ordinary human shape of things, a healing, a war, a name people say, a death at the right time, and a place to be buried. That is all he was ever asking for, and it takes a god to arrange it. Sails do pass. The island is not far off the shipping lanes, and there is traffic in the season. And every single one that passes and does not turn is a small event that has to be absorbed. Sometimes one turns. That is the worst kind. He tells us about those. Crews putting in for water or shelter, finding him, being kind, giving him food, giving him clothes, listening to the whole story, and then not taking him. Nobody is willing to have that smell and those cries in a small boat for a week. and the rags. I said we would come back to them, and this is where they belong, because they are the most quietly devastating object in the play. He binds the wound. That is what the rags are for. He has been doing it for 10 years with the same handful of cloth, the strips they left him, and whatever passing crews gave him. And he washes them and dries them on the rocks and uses them again. The play makes a point of them being stained. That is how the young man's scouts identify the cave as inhabited. The leaves pressed flat, the crude cup, and rags out drying in the sun, heavy with discharge. A man with no medicine, no clean water in quantity, and no help, performing wound care on himself twice a day for a decade with the same 6 pieces of cloth, and doing it properly. That is the part. He has worked out a routine, and he keeps to it alone, with nobody to see whether he bothers. There is a whole quiet argument in that detail, and the play never states it out loud. This is a man who has not given up on his own body, in circumstances where giving up would be entirely reasonable and completely invisible. And in the evening, the fire and whatever he shot, and then the long dark and the wind, and the sound of the sea on a shore that has sounded exactly the same every night for a decade, and the attacks, which come when they come. The play stages one, and it is one of the most physically demanding scenes in Greek drama. A man on stage in real pain, over an extended period, unable to speak in verse properly, breaking into cries. And then, at the end of it, the exhaustion and sleep coming down on him. The chorus sings to that sleep, actually sings to it as a god. Sleep who knows no pain, sleep who knows no anguish, come to us gently. Come, King, come with your blessing. That is a hymn to sleep, sung over a suffering man in a play from the 5th century before our era, and it is one of the few places in surviving literature where somebody put into words what everybody feels watching a person in pain finally go under, which is roughly what this channel exists for, so I will leave that where it is. And there is the other thing about 10 Years Alone that the play notices and almost nothing else in ancient literature does. He talks to himself, not madly. The play gives him the habit of addressing things, his own foot directly in the second person, as a separate entity that is doing this to him. The cave, the bough, which he speaks to as a companion and asks questions of, the birds he is about to shoot. That is exactly what happens to people who are alone for long periods, and it is well documented from every context in which it occurs. Lighthouse keepers, single-handed sailors, prisoners in isolation. The apparatus we have for talking does not switch off because there is nobody there. It finds something. And the second thing, which the play stages beautifully in the first minutes of the arrival, he cannot stop talking once there is somebody to talk to. He asks the same question several times. He tells them things they did not ask about. He gives them his whole history in a rush, out of order, and then apologizes, and then does it again. Anyone who has been alone for a long stretch and then had a visitor knows precisely that feeling, the tap that will not turn off once it has been opened. Where older commentators saw only a hero pouring out his grievances, more recent readers have pointed at how physically accurate it is. Somebody who wrote that play had either been alone for a very long time or had sat with somebody who had. 10 years of that. And then, one morning there is a ship in the bay. Why now? Because the war has stopped working, and a prophet has told them why. 10 years in, with the best fighter on either side dead, and nothing to show for any of it, the Greeks captured a Trojan seer, the king's own son in most versions, taken at night by the same clever man from the western island, and made him talk. And what he gave them was a list of conditions, things that had to be true before the city could fall. We have followed a couple of them on other nights. Fetch the young son of the dead champion from the island where his mother had hidden him. Take the sacred image out of the shrine on the citadel. And this, the city cannot be taken without the bough. Not the man necessarily. The sources differ on that, and the difference is the whole moral problem of the story. Some versions of the prophecy specify the weapon. Some specify the man who carries it. and at least one strand says both must come willingly. So a ship is sent, and it carries two people. One is the clever man. He is going because he is the one who talks people into things, and because he was the one who left him there. And he knows perfectly well that if he walks up that beach, he will be shot before he opens his mouth. The other is a young man of about 18, and he has never met anybody in this story. He is the son of the dead champion, the boy fetched from an island a few months ago because another prophecy required him. He has been at Troy for a matter of weeks. He has not been in the war. He was not there when they left a man on a beach 10 years ago. He was a small child at home. And he is famous in the sense that everybody knows whose son he is and expects things of him accordingly. That is the arrangement the play opens with. An old strategist and a young man who has never done anything, standing on a beach below a cave with a plan. The plan is a lie. Feel the beach in the early morning while it is explained to him. The tide is out. The rocks below the cave are covered in weed that pops under your foot, and there are limpets on them, and the wet stone smells of iodine and cold. The clever man does not pretend it is anything other than what it is. He says it outright. Your job today is to deceive him. You will tell him you are sailing home, that you have quarreled with the leaders, that they took your father's armor and gave it to me. He will believe that because everyone knows it happened and because he hates me. And when he trusts you, you will get the bow. And the young man says no. That is the scene. And it is one of the great short exchanges in ancient drama. And it goes something like this. The boy says, I would rather fail doing the right thing than win by cheating. And the older man says, I know. I was young too, and I had a slow tongue and a quick hand, and I have learned that it is the tongue that runs everything. And then he asks him for one day. Give me one shameless day, he says, and afterwards, be called the most upright man alive for the rest of your life. That is the argument. Not a corruption scene, a negotiation about the cost of a single day. And the boy, and this is why the play is a masterpiece rather than a lecture, agrees. Now watch what happens when he actually has to do it. He goes up to the cave. He finds it empty and looks at the contents, the leaves, the cup, the rags drying. And the scouts report what is inside. And there is a passage where a young man stands in a stranger's home and understands from the objects exactly what has been happening here. Then a man comes down the path. He hears them before he sees them, and he hears something he has not heard in 10 years, which is Greek being spoken. And what he does when he comes round the rock is not what an audience expects. He does not threaten them. He asks them urgently, almost apologetically, not to be frightened of him, Emmett, because he knows what he looks like. He says, do not be afraid of me. Do not run from a man gone wild. And then he asks the question he has been saving for a decade. And he asks it 3 or 4 times in different ways because he cannot believe it. Are you Greek? Speak to me. Let me hear the sound of it. There is a version of that line in the play that always gets me. He says he wants to hear the voice because it has been so long and asks, has speech itself become strange to me? The boy tells him the lie and tells it well. And the man believes it completely because he wants to, and because a person who has been alone for 10 years has no defenses against being spoken to kindly. And then he asks to be taken home. Not to Troy, home, to his own country in Thessaly, which is on the way, more or less, and he says it will be a short detour, and he begs. The word for it in the play is the formal one. He supplicates. He takes hold of the young man's hand, and the young man says yes, knowing exactly where the ship is going. They go down to the shore together, and on the way, it takes him. That is how the play does it. At the exact moment the deception is working, at the moment he is happiest, the wound goes off. You can see it coming in his speech before he can. He starts breaking off. He says something, and then stops and says, nothing is wrong, and starts again, and stops again. The verse is written to fall apart, and then it arrives properly. He asks for the young man's hand, and gets it, and crushes it. He begs to be cut, to have the foot taken off at the ankle, right now, with a sword. and he means it. He says, "Burn it. There is fire up there. Do it." And then the thing that only somebody who has been through this many times would think of, he hands over the bow. He says, "Take this. Take it and hold it while this passes, and when it is over, give it back." He explains the mechanics of what is about to happen to him, that after the worst of it, sleep comes, and that he will be unconscious, and that he cannot guard anything then. And he says one more thing, and it is the line the whole play is built around. Do not let anybody else take it. And quietly, I know you will not. He gives away the one thing keeping him alive, voluntarily, into the hands of the person sent to steal it, because 10 minutes of kindness was enough. The young man takes it, and then the attack peaks, and the man goes down, and there is a long stretch of pain in which he cannot say words. The text has actual cries written into it, which was unusual. And then it ebbs, and he lies on the rocks with the sweat cooling and a dark trickle coming out of the wound. And he says, "It is going. It always goes." And he asks them not to leave while he sleeps. That is what he asks. Out of everything he could ask for, that, stay while I sleep, because that is what happened last time. They promise, and he goes under on the shore in the daylight, with his head on the stones. Now, a boy of 18 is standing on a beach holding a bow, with an unconscious man at his feet, and the ship is 100 yards away, and the wind is right. He has won. The bow is the object of the mission. He can walk down to the water and be gone before the man wakes. And it is done, and he will have delivered exactly what the prophecy required. The chorus tells him to. Explicitly, in a low, urgent song over the sleeping man, the wind is fair. He cannot see. Take it and go. And he says no. His reason is the one that reorganizes the whole play. He says the god did not ask for the bow. The god asked for the man. And taking the weapon and leaving its owner on the beach would be a false victory and a shameful boast. Whether that is what the prophecy actually said is arguable, and the play knows it, and it does not resolve it. What matters is that a young man standing over a sleeping cripple with a fortune in his hands has decided that he is not going to do the thing he came to do. The man wakes. And he wakes badly, because that is what happens. He wakes not knowing where he is for a second, and then he sees the young man still standing there, and he is amazed. He says, more or less, "You stayed. Nobody stays." And the young man tells him the truth. All of it. Where the ship is going, who sent him, what he agreed to, and why. He says the words, "I have to take you to Troy." And the man's reaction is the most terrible moment in it, and it is not anger first. It is the sound of somebody understanding that the last 10 minutes of his life have been the best in 10 years and were not real. He asks for the bow back, and the young man is standing there holding it, genuinely undecided, when the clever man comes out from behind the rocks, where he has been listening the whole time. Now the argument, and it is worth doing properly, because it is the reason this play is still staged. The older man's position is not villainous, and the play refuses to make it so. He says, "I serve the state and the gods and the whole army. 10,000 men have been dying outside those walls for 10 years, and the prophecy says, you can end it. Whatever was done to you was done to protect an army that could not sacrifice. It is not personal, and it was not cruelty." He also says, and this is the part that dates badly and dates brilliantly, "I am whatever the situation requires. When there is a contest for justice, no one is more just than I am. But I want, above all, to win. The wounded man's position is simpler, and, to almost every audience since, more sympathetic. He says, you did this to me. You left me alive. You did not have the decency to kill me, and you have not thought about me in 10 years. And now you need something." And he refuses to go. Absolutely, on any terms. He says he would rather stay on the island than be useful to the men who left him there. That refusal is what makes the play difficult, because he is right, and he is also wrong. Right about what was done to him. Wrong in the sense that his refusal costs him his leg, his life, his return, his name, and helps nobody. The clever man leaves. He tries a threat, and it does not land, and he goes. And the young man gives the bow back. He simply hands it over, in defiance of his commander, of the army, of the prophecy, and of a plan he had already agreed to, because he took it under false pretenses, and it is not his. The older man reappears to stop him, and the wounded man puts an arrow on the string and would have shot him, and the boy grabs his arm, and then he offers, seriously, to take him home. Not to Troy. Home to Thessaly, as promised, at the cost of his own standing with the army and possibly his life. And the wounded man says yes. And the two of them start walking down the beach toward the ship. That is where the play would end, and it would be unbearable, because the audience knows the war has to be won, and the city has to fall, and the whole of the rest of Greek legend depends on it. And then the sky opens. What appears is the strong man himself, not a god exactly, and that is the point. The man who gave him the bow, now among the immortals after the pyre on the mountain, come back to speak to the person who lit it. And what he says is short, and it is not a command. He says, I have come for your sake. He tells him what will happen if he goes, that he will be healed at Troy, that he will be the best of the army, that he will take the city, that the honors will be his, and that he will send the spoils home to his father. And then he says the thing that reframes the entire 10 years. Look at my own life. I too went through enormous suffering and won this immortality that you can see. And for you, likewise, out of these sufferings, a life of glory is to come. He also adds one instruction, which nobody in the play would have thought of on their own. When you take the city, respect the gods, because everything else dies, and that does not. That is the moment the play ends, and it has been argued about since antiquity. Ancient critics disliked the device, a god arriving to sort out a plot the characters could not. And one philosopher said flatly that a resolution should come out of the story itself and not out of a machine. Others have pointed out that this particular one is different because what appears is not a god from outside the story, but the person the whole story has been about, the man whose bow it is, whose favor it was, whose death began it, and that he arrives not to compel but to give a reason. The man agrees to go, and listen to what he does before he leaves, because it is the most beautiful passage in the play, and it is a farewell to an island. He says goodbye to the cave that watched over him, to the nymphs of the meadows and the streams, to the deep male crash of the sea on the headland, to the spring and to the plain where he drank, to the ground itself which he calls by name. He says, farewell, and forgive me. And he asks the island to send him where he is fated to go. 10 years of hating a place, and on the last morning he stands on the beach and says goodbye to the cave and the water and the rocks by name, like a man leaving a house he grew up in. That is not sentimentality. That is what actually happens to people. Now, what happened afterwards? He was healed at Troy. The sources agree on the healing and differ on who did it. One of the two surgeon brothers with the army, sons of the god of medicine, or the god's son directly, or the seer. The treatment described is not magic. He was put to sleep, the wound was cut open and cleaned out, and a herb was applied. In one account, it is a specific plant associated with that same island, which the goddess of the island had given. He woke up healed, and the leg worked. One detail of the healing is worth having, because it is the only tender thing in the whole aftermath. The play does not show it, but the tradition is consistent that he was put to sleep first. That is not a small thing. Greek surgery did not have anesthesia in any form we would recognize. There was wine, and there were preparations of mandrake and poppy that appear in the medical writers, and that seem to have been used to make a patient drowsy and manageable. And there was holding people down. What the sources say is that he was made to sleep and that the work was done while he was under, and that he woke without it. After 10 years in which sleep was the only relief and always the end of an attack rather than the beginning of a repair, the last time he goes under, he wakes up healed. There is no version of this story in which that was designed as a symmetry, and it is one anyway. Then he went into the war, and he did what the prophecy said he would. He shot the man who had killed the greatest fighter of the Greeks with an arrow 10 years before. The prince from Troy, who had started the whole thing on a mountain with 3 goddesses and a piece of fruit. The wounding was not instantly fatal. The arrows were poisoned with the water serpent's blood, and there was no antidote. And what followed is a story we have told. A man carried up a mountain to ask the woman he had left 20 years earlier to heal him. And after that, the city fell. Within a matter of weeks, in the way we have followed on another night, the timber, the offering carved into the flank, and the door in the belly. He went home with his share. And here the tradition splits in the way it usually does, and I will give you both, because both are worth having. In one, he sailed back to Thessaly and lived out the rest of his life there quietly, and that is that. In the other, he could not stay. There was trouble at home, a change of regime in some accounts, or simply a country that had moved on in 20 years. And he took ship west and ended up in southern Italy, on the instep near the Gulf, and founded a town there. And in that region there was a shrine to him for centuries, and the local people said that the bow was in it, the actual bow, dedicated in a temple of the god of medicine. That detail is reported by more than one ancient writer, quite matter-of-factly, in the way you would mention a bridge, a bow from a story, in a building, in a real town, being pointed at by somebody's grandfather. One more thing about the young man, because his part of this has a shadow over it that the play declines to mention, and that every single person in that theater knew. He is the son of the greatest fighter who ever lived, and he has just been shown choosing decency over advantage at considerable cost. And a few weeks after the point where the play ends, when the city falls, he is the one who does the thing that later Greeks found most disgusting about their own side. An old king, taking refuge at an altar in his own courtyard in the middle of the night, killed at the altar. That is him. It is on the pots and in the poems, and it was famous, and it is the reason his name carried a particular weight for centuries afterwards. The playwright does not raise it. He puts on stage the last clean day of a young man's life, 3 months before he becomes the person everybody remembers him as, and lets the audience do the rest. That is not an accident in a play about what a war does to people. The boy who cannot bring himself to lie to a cripple on a beach is about a season away from the worst act of the whole war. And the man he is being taught by, the one behind the rocks, the one who says he wants above all to win, has 10 more years of open sea ahead of him and every one of his companions dead. Nobody in this play gets away with anything. It just happens after the curtain. Now, why does this story exist at all? Because somebody wanted to write about a thing that everybody knew about and nobody discussed, which is what a community does with a person it cannot use. All 3 of the great Athenian tragedians wrote a play on this subject. That is remarkable in itself. We know of very few subjects all 3 took on. 2 of those plays are lost, and we know about them only because a Greek writer of the Roman period, several centuries later, sat down and compared all 3 and wrote an essay about it, which survives. He tells us the differences, and they are illuminating. In the earliest version, by the oldest of the 3, the deception was cruder, and the hero did not know the man deceiving him. In the middle version, the chorus was made up of local islanders, which means the island was inhabited, which means he was not alone at all, which changes everything. And in that version, a Trojan embassy also arrives, competing for the bow, so that the play becomes a bidding war for a wounded man. The version that survives is the last of the 3, staged by a playwright who was about 87 years old at the time, 3 years before he died, and who won first prize with it. And what that old man did, and this is the change that matters, was to strip out the islanders and make him completely alone, and to invent the young man. That is his addition. The boy is not in the tradition before this. He is the moral instrument the play needed, and he is put there so that the audience has somebody to be. And there is a context you should have, because the play was not written in peacetime. Athens in that decade was in the middle of a long, exhausting, badly going war of its own. 20-odd years in, with a disastrous overseas expedition behind it, and an oligarchic coup a few years before, and the democracy only recently restored. The audience watching that play were people who had spent 2 decades being told that what the state needed and what was decent were not always the same thing. They watched a young man be told that lying to a cripple was necessary for the war effort, and watched him do it, and watched him decide it was not worth it. Some scholars read the play as a straightforward argument for the older, harder position, and the ending as a divine endorsement of it. Others read it as the most sustained attack on political expediency in Greek literature. The play sits there and refuses to say. And then there is the other reading, and it is more recent, and it has come mostly from people outside classics. A critic writing in the middle of the last century took the play as the central image of a whole theory of art, that the wound and the bow are inseparable, that the same thing which makes a person unbearable to be near is the source of the gift that everybody needs, and that a society which exiles the one loses the other. That reading has been used, and probably overused, about artists ever since. But it is not a modern invention imposed on the material. It is in the play. The community cannot tolerate the smell and the screaming, and the community cannot win without the man doing the screaming, and both of those facts are true at once, and neither cancels the other. Doctors and people who work with chronic illness have written about this play more than about any other ancient text, and for a reason that has nothing to do with literary theory. It is the most accurate portrait of chronic pain that survives from the ancient world. Look at what it gets right. The attacks that come and go and cannot be predicted. The fact that between them, he is entirely lucid and even good company. The way people stop coming. The way the person in pain becomes, in the eyes of others, the pain, so that his name and his condition merge until nobody remembers he was the best archer in Greece, only that he is the man on the island, and the thing the play understands better than almost anything written since, which is that what he wants is not primarily to be cured. Read his speeches. What he asks for, over and over, is to be taken home, to be spoken to be listened to not be left while he sleeps. The cure arrives in the last 2 minutes and off stage. The whole play is about the 10 years of being treated as a problem. And the theme underneath all of it, which the play states outright in the last speech, is the one I keep coming back to. He is offered a life of glory out of the suffering. Not instead of it, out of it. The man who says that to him is somebody who died in agony on a mountain and was made immortal for it, and who is standing there as proof that the two things are not separable. That is a very Greek answer, and it is not a comfortable one. It does not say the suffering was worthwhile or deserved or planned. It says only that it happened, and that what came out of it was real, and that both are his. There is one more version of the ending that deserves a mention, because it turns up in the visual record rather than the texts. Vase painters liked this subject, and what they liked was not the argument. It was the leg. There are pots showing him seated, with the foot bandaged and held out, and the posture is unmistakable. A man arranged around one part of his body. On some of them, there are birds in the scene, and on at least one, the cave is indicated with a couple of strokes and a bow hanging in it. There is a famous gem, small enough to sit in the palm, showing him alone with his head down, and a Roman writer describes a painting, since lost, that showed the moment of the abandonment, the ship already out, the man on the shore, and the crew not looking back. That painting is described as having made people cry, which is a thing ancient art criticism says about very few works. There is also, and this is my favorite piece of evidence for how completely alive this story was, the report that when the surviving play was staged in Athens, the audience found the cries so convincing that the performance became a byword for it, and that later actors made their reputations on that scene specifically. An old man of 87 wrote a part that required an actor to be in agony on stage for several minutes, and actors have been queuing up for it ever since. And the island is still there. That is the thing I find steadying about all of this, and it is where I would like to leave you. It is a real place with people on it, and a harbor and ferries, and there is a village on the northern side and hot springs, and a beach where the sand is dark because the rock is volcanic. There are wildflowers in spring that people come to see. There is an earth on that island that was famous throughout antiquity. A red clay, dug from one particular hill on one particular day of the year under supervision, stamped with a seal, and sold all over the Mediterranean as a medicine. Stamped earth, they called it, and doctors used it for 1,000 years. There is a physician who wrote about going there personally to watch the digging. So the island that was the byword for exile and a rotting wound was also, for the whole of antiquity, a source of medicine. I do not think anybody planned that. But the ancient writers noticed it, and so did the playwright, whose messenger says the goddess of that island supplied the herb. Now come back to the cave one last time, and then we will put it all down. It is morning, and the beach is empty, and the ship went at first light with 2 men on it. The fire has gone out for the last time. There is a ring of blackened stones and a heap of gray ash, still faintly warm in the middle if you put your hand in it, and it will be cold by noon and rained on by autumn and gone in a year. Inside the cave, the bed of leaves is still pressed into the shape of a body, and it will hold that shape for a few weeks, and then the leaves will dry and lift and blow out through the second entrance and be scattered along the shore. The cup is where he left it, badly made, cut by somebody who was learning as he went. Nobody will find it. It will sit in the corner of a cave on a volcanic island in the North Aegean, and it will still be sitting there long after everybody in this story is dead. The feathers go first. The wind takes them off down the beach in the afternoon in small drifts, and after a week, there is no sign that anyone was ever here. And below the cave, downhill, on the path he wore into the scrub over 10 years, the spring is still running out of the rock into the little basin and over the lip and down toward the sea, cold, clear, entirely indifferent, doing exactly what it did on every one of those 3,600 mornings. It does not know he has gone. It will go on doing it. Above the island, the sky is enormous and clearing. The wind has swung round to the north, which is fair for the crossing. Out on the water there is a sail, small now, getting smaller. Let all of it go. Whatever is aching tonight, let it ache quietly in the background and stop being the whole of the room. Nothing is required of you now. No walking, no watching the horizon, no waiting for a ship. Let your shoulders drop. Let the weight go out of your legs and into the bed. Come, sleep, who knows no pain and knows no anguish. Come gently. Come with the light in your hands. Sleep well.